everyone. Welcome back to Money Matters with Shannon Jackson, the personal finance show focused on moving you forward financially. Welcome to February, the month many of us associate with love because of Valentine's Day. So we're going to be talking about relationships and money today. Are you thinking about taking your relationship to the next level? Are you and your significant other compatible when it comes to your finances? Is it enough to go the distance? Is it time to maybe have that money talk? And when should you have that discussion? What should you be talking about? And my guest today has some amazing advice for you. He's the founder of Sheriff Consulting, which specializes in designing and delivering professional and leadership skill courses for accounting and finance professionals. He's a CPA and member of the Chartered Professional Accountants of Canada, the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. He is a certified internal auditor, a certified general management accountant, and a certified virtual presenter. And he is also a graduate in improvisation from the Second City and a member of the Alliance of Canadian Cinema, Television, and Radio Artists. Garth Sheriff, welcome to Money Matters.
Thank you, Shannon. A pleasure to be here.
I have to say that is an impressive biography. So can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you started in finance and your roles with improvisation and acting and how that has sort of contributed to your path in your professional life?
Yeah, it's definitely not the regular chartered professional accountant story, Shannon. I from an immigrant family, so with an immigrant family from Sri Lanka, first generation Canadian myself, they gave me a few options as a profession: accountant, lawyer, engineer. Actor was not part of the options that I had when I was a young person. So I chose accounting. I also chose accounting because as new immigrants to Canada, I saw some of the challenges my parents had managing their finances, as just trying to figure out credit and mortgages. And, I didn't fully understand that as a child, but I understood that they were struggling in some of the decisions they had to make. And so that informed my decision to become an accountant, and actually informs my volunteer work as a member of CPA Canada's financial literacy campaign. I volunteer, deliver programs to schools, new Canadians, seniors around various topics on financial literacy. But during my career in accounting, I did eventually decide to pursue my interest in acting and improv. And I did that for a few years, which has come in very handy, since that's basically what I do full time now, is deliver presentations and courses on communication, presentation skills to accounting and finance professionals.
We're talking about relationships and money today. And actually in our last episode, we talked about the psychology of money. And so how important is it for us to understand our own relationship with money? And is there a connection between how we feel about it and how it makes us feel about ourselves?
There's absolutely a connection. When we talk about money, and especially in the household, there can be a lot of vulnerability, a lot of information asymmetry when one person knows a little bit more about finances or what's happening in the household than another. And it can feel like a place where it isn't necessarily safe to raise any concerns about spending. And again, I could say that in my own personal experience, as I said before, growing up, it wasn't always a conversation that was easy. I could feel that in my personal relationships. I'm a CPA. My partner is a historian. We always, we should be talking about these things, and sometimes it's just a bit sticky because it can get into conversations around behavior and interests, and also just feel uncomfortable. And so there should be a safe space to talk about this with your partner. I think it's absolutely an important thing to establish in a relationship that might be long-term, about how we spend and how we budget, but not an easy conversation.
I absolutely agree. And I hear a lot from clients as well that come in and meet with me that it's the same statement, that it's not an easy conversation to have. So do you have some advice for viewers right now on how they can create sort of a healthier relationship between their finances and themselves?
The most important thing with a healthy relationship financially is to start the conversation early, and especially around budgeting. It's not necessarily around what you're spending on initially in a relationship. It's just tracking, especially if you start to share expenses, and just being aware of what's being spent, and just having conversations around that budget that you might establish after a few months or years together, spending habits evolve. And sometimes in relationships, we have our own spending habits that are not completely transparent to the other party. And it's not meant to hide anything. It's just meant that it might affect the overall spending budget of the household, of the spending power of the couple together. So the earlier you can start the conversation without judgment, I think that's the key part, is not to necessarily judge spending choices at the beginning, just to be aware of where people spend their money, the couples both together and individually, and just start to be open to tracking those. That's the biggest thing, to track expenses, especially as relationships mature, bigger spending decisions come into play, such as purchasing a home, or it could be vacations, other bigger sort of collective spending choices are made. But if you understand behaviors and budgeting early on, it's easier to plan for those and easier to get into those conversations without feeling like you're going to be surprised by your partner in terms of what they are spending their money on and how they're going to contribute to a shared expense.
I think it's important as well to sort of understand how we ourselves feel about our own personal spending habits and things like this, because you almost have to think about money as another individual in your relationship. So you have to pay attention to it. You have to give it that sort of attention on a regular basis to sort of understand how we manage our own finances before maybe we even come into a mutual relationship. And so obviously having that sort of money talk, it does help to make for a better relationship. And we know that money also takes its toll, even on the best of relationships. So about a third of adults with partners report that money is a big source of conflict, unfortunately, in their relationships. And statistics will show that the leading causes of relationship breakdown in Canada is, unfortunately, money. And 40% of Canadian marriages are expected to end in divorce before the couple even reach their 50th wedding anniversary. So let's talk a little bit about this. What is it about money that makes it such a sensitive subject to talk about? Why do we just not want to talk to our partners about it?
Yeah, I think sometimes there is a leadership position inside the partnership where somebody says, don't worry, I have this taken care of. And you there's a trust exercise that you might trust that person, and you feel like, this doesn't need to be discussed because it can get messy. I think when we think about finances and money, it feels like that's not necessarily a topic to move a relationship forward. And it's better to maybe just talk about it when things come up. And maybe if someone's taking a leadership position or they know a little bit more about finances, it's easier for things to go on organically and not necessarily be specifically discussed. It is really hard. It's a super stressful conversation because it's about our spending behavior. It's about decisions we have to make on our personal spending choices. And it can be very awkward, and it can feel there's a vulnerability to it. I've been there myself, right? Where you don't necessarily want to say, for example, we all have our spending habits. I spend maybe a little bit too much on my own interests, such as tennis and other sporting activities that I do. And sometimes I don't always want to, bring this up with my partner that, hey, you know what, I think I might have gone way over budget on these expenses, because it feels like, we let the partnership down or we're hiding something. So I can definitely empathize with that, because I feel that in my own relationship as well. But what you want to do is try to make it as pragmatic as possible. That's why it's great to just start writing down or tracking expenses just without judgment. Just track it. Don't have to put any parameters on it. So you can get in the habit of discussing expenses more like a budgetary discussion, like you would have in an organization, like a business, saying, this is the way our expenses are looking. How can we make some other choices? And trying to be as transparent as possible. That's one of the biggest things, because surprises financially are the reasons why these relationships face stress, and sometimes they break up because of it.
And some recent surveys are actually showing that money is this taboo subject. People just don't want to talk about it. But even when they do talk about it, they often hide some information from their partners. There was a BDO survey that was done a few years ago, and over 50% of the people that were surveyed said that they were most likely to kind of bend the truth when they were talking about their money situation with their partners. And then a more recent survey also said that nearly half of Canadians have hidden or are currently hiding some secrets from their partners. And most of those people are hiding information about their debt. So they don't want to talk about their credit cards and how much is owing and what their spending habits are, like you mentioned, and even some of the debt maybe that they had before they entered into the relationship. So these are concerning statistics when it comes to relationships. Do you have any input on why these statistics are so high and why we're not being honest about our finances?
Yeah, Shannon, I think you described one of the biggest sort of shameful things in a relationship is debt, bringing some sort of extra burden to the relationship. And I think there shouldn't be shame behind debt because there's all kinds of reasons that debt accumulates before the relationship. And that's something that's part of sort of the exploration of the relationship to understand, a person's history and how they might have made financial decisions. It's almost in some ways like a conversation around mental health. We sometimes just think, oh, this is not a subject I feel comfortable talking about, even though it's really important for intervention, for all kinds of reasons to be out in front of these subjects. So debt, as a specific example, Shannon, is something that people do feel a lot of shame about, do want to kind of keep to themselves. But in a relationship, we can probably all agree to this, that surprises are generally not a good thing when you're unprepared for what to do next, especially when you're hiding financial decisions. So it might take time, though. That's why it's important to establish small steps before revealing, hey, tell me all of your financial secrets. I think that's not going to create the psychological safety for that conversation to happen organically. So it's just about creating good financial behavior in real time and then opening up to other questions about, is there anything else I should know? Is there anything we want to do for financial planning for the future? And hopefully conversations around debt or anything that is financially hard to talk about just comes across just naturally.
I unfortunately do see a lot of clients come in that will fully admit that they're coming to see me about their debt, but they tell me that their partner does not know about the situation that they're in. And it's unfortunate that we feel that we have to keep that to ourselves. And you're right about feeling that shame about having that debt load hanging over our heads. And so while talking about our personal finances may not be as romantic as a candlelit dinner, but studies are pretty clear that having that money discussion really is essential to maintaining a happy and healthy relationship with your partner. So how do we actually start that conversation? So when we come back from our break, Garth is going to give us some great advice when Money Matters returns.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
At St. John Ambulance, we're all about community. We teach life-saving skills and provide community support through our volunteer services. All St. John Ambulance product sales and training registrations support these important services. Volunteer, donate, or enroll in a program today so we can continue to have an impact on our community. Visit sja.ca to learn more. At St. John Ambulance, we do more than save lives, we change lives.
What kind of show do you want to see on Rogers TV? What interests you? Log on to rogerstv.com, fill out a show proposal, and tell us about your segment idea. We want to know what you want to see. Rogers TV, only on Rogers.
Welcome back to Money Matters with Shannon Jackson. My guest today is Garth Sheriff, founder of Sheriff Consulting, member of the Chartered Professional Accountants of Canada, the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. He's a certified internal auditor, a certified general management accountant, and a certified virtual presenter. He's also a graduate in improvisation from the Second City and a member of the Alliance of Canadian Cinema, Television, and Radio Artists. Garth, thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you, Shannon.
Today, we're talking about love and money and relationships. And in the opening segment, we focused on the importance of sort of better understanding our own personal relationships with money. And we also talked about the importance of having that money talk with your significant other. And according to surveys, many people do struggle with not only having this conversation, but just getting it started. So Garth, how can we just get that conversation started with our partner and talk about our money situation?
Yeah, it's a difficult one to find the timing and place for it. I mean, Valentine's Day might be dinner, Love Actually, and then fit in that discussion on finances and financial decisions. But in all seriousness, it's a tough place to figure out where the safety is. I talk about in courses that I deliver this topic of psychological safety, the belief that in a relationship it's okay to take a risk, and this is a behavioral science term, and it's something that has to be established. And one of the biggest risks you can take is sort of going through your financial history and talking about decisions, because part of it is that we've all probably made poor financial decisions at some point or had challenges with finances. And I think being vulnerable is to just show your own experiences with that. And that's why when we talked earlier, I talked about seeing my family's financial challenges, and we never talked about finances in our house, but I could feel it, right? The stress is there. And when we in a conversation with our partners, when we are also open about what we have challenges with spending or mistakes we've made in the past and how we want to work together to solve problems, it might open up the door for the other person who might feel a little bit unsafe talking about spending or financial challenges or decisions that they don't want to talk about that they made in the past that resulted in debt. Make it feel a little bit easier, because you're in a relationship, you're there to support each other, and part of supporting each other is financially. And so just showing that everyone is challenged by this. Mortgage rates are going up. There's all kinds of things that are challenging households and partnerships when it comes to living expenses. And just being vulnerable yourself, having that conversation can make the other person feel safe, and then you can have very substantive conversations.
And do you think that there is a certain point in the relationship that this conversation should maybe happen? Should it be in the beginning or the middle? And when do you think that talk should happen?
Yeah, that's a great question for a relationship. And I don't have a definite answer. I mean, part of it is you have to make a judgment call. I mean, there's a tax answer if you become common law as a partnership, and for tax reasons, you might want to start thinking about being more open with all of your financial decisions. If you're planning for collective expenditures as a couple, as I said, a vacation, a car, whatever it might be, then you want to bring more financial transparency. So it really depends on the stage of the relationship. But I would say one of the markers for it would be where you are starting to share expenses, or some of your financial histories coming together in the form of, let's say, a tax return that you're filing as common law.
I like too that you mentioned that we want to create this safe space when we're having that conversation with our partner. We want to be able to feel the understanding there, where they're coming from their perspective, and what we're bringing to the relationship as well. And I know when it comes to our finances, our couples often have a lot of the same questions. And I just want to go through a few of those right now with you and get your advice on a few of these. So how important is it that you and your partner are on the same page, have the same attitudes and values when it comes to money?
I think it's important that you agree on what your shared goals are, because it is difficult for everyone's values to be the same. For example, I might spend money, discretionary funds, on one type of interest where my partner might not think that that's the best way. But if that's sort of what we've agreed on as sort of my interest and my ability to spend on, let's say, tennis, and my partner's going to spend something else on something else of her own interest, his or her own interest, then that's at least agreed upon. So I think it's difficult sometimes to have values match up completely when it comes to financial decisions. I think it's always transparency first, that you can talk it through. And then understand the other person's point of view, and just being able to have a conversational space. It's just like other matters within a relationship. I mean, not everyone's going to watch the same film together and say, I enjoyed the film, right? They're going to look at different parts of their own spending habits as their own. It's just, can you have these conversations? I think that first part of being able to have the conversations, feeling safe, and trying to avoid surprises with your finance, especially as you're moving deeper into the relationship and having those bigger shared expenses.
I like what you said before about having shared goals. And so being transparent about our own sort of values towards our finances, but I think having the same goals is really important as well, just like you said. And as well, like you said, being transparent about our finances, I think is really important. Just being honest about where you are, what are your priorities, when it comes to your spending and things like that, and maybe meet each other on a mutual playing field, I think is always the goal. So do you think that every single purchase needs to be discussed with your partner?
No, I don't think every single purchase needs to be discussed with your partner, but this is part of setting a budget. I mean, a lot of things comes down to basics. And when we talk about individual financial health, we talk about setting budgets, establishing spending history, and then spending habits. And so once you establish a budget, there's going to be sometimes you go over budget, or sometimes you use the budget differently, but at least you're tracking. I think when you track each person's individual expenses, it depends on the relationship. I think that can feel a little bit controlling for some relationships, that every expense goes through. It depends on what the relationship feels comfortable for. I don't think that's necessary in a healthy financial relationship with your partner, that everything, every credit card expenditure, every time you get a coffee, that's necessarily discussed. Even though if you track it, though, if you use an app, if you use a spreadsheet and you just track your expenditures just to see what you can save and spend on, that's just going to happen through the tracking mechanism, not through a conversation that you have to have every time. But that, again, I think that depends on how the relationship is.
Should couples have a joint bank account, or should they keep their finances separate?
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear your answer to this. I think it's the dependent on the relationship and how much the financial household is combining with the partners, right? Are they really using each other's sources for expenditures? Because you can't have a relationship where everyone keeps their finances separate, and that's the way the relationship is, and you keep track of yours and you keep track of yours. But that would work as long as you don't have shared expenses and shared goals, right? Because as soon as you have that, it's like going to dinner and you say everyone's going to pay equal amounts, and then all of a sudden somebody got a bigger piece of like the steak, and you got the salad, and you're like, wait a minute, I don't think this is fair. So once you're sharing expenses, it becomes harder to separate them. And so I think sometimes it's better to have a joint account for those types of expenses. So this is, again, part of, just like every phase in a relationship, this is a part of the growth of a relationship. At what point do you feel like you can have a joint account where you're bringing in, a piece of yourself that you might have kept to yourself previously into the relationship, as a place where you have shared expenditures. So it depends, I guess, would be my answer. What do you usually advise your clients on with that?
So I am always of the opinion that a relationship, particularly if you are married or common law, it's a mutual relationship, and you are going to be sharing a lot of your life with that other person. So I tend to encourage having a joint account, at least, like you say, for those shared expenses, because both of you are benefiting from living under the same home and heating the house and all of those types of things that come out on a regular basis. And so at least having that joint account to cover those regular living expenses that everyone is benefiting from. And then if you each have those separate accounts where you manage your own personal expenses separate from that, I think that's okay. But I've always been of the opinion that a relationship is a shared relationship, and that we need to, I think, have the mindset that we are sharing our lives with another person, and that does mean our money and our income as well. So I agree with you on your opinion there. And so How often do you think couples should be reviewing their finances together? Do you think there's a sort of a regular time period that they should be doing this?
Absolutely. I mean, again, just like a business and just like you would individually, we give the same advice that you want to be tracking and having conversations about finances regularly. I would say at least once a month. At least once a month at the end of the month. I mean, that's usually the best time because you have credit card statements that come in. You have monthly summary statements and you can look at things, especially if you've been tracking them. It's good to have that discussion. And part of that discussion too is, especially as you're trying to establish a healthy relationship to talk about finances, is not to come in with judgment and irritation around certain things as you're trying to establish what the sort of the financial patterns that you have as a couple are. So as soon as someone comes in with irritation or anger about a particular expenditure, it can create a place of unsafety for the other person, so that they start to hide expenditures. They start to not necessarily disclose certain things. So you always want to, treat it with care, treat it with transparency, but also try to bring as much understanding to what the person is spending and how that can be discussed if it needs to be redirected or changed in a healthy way.
You sort of touched on this a little bit, that having that conversation, if we're not having that open shared space, that it can sort of create some strain. So do you have any advice on how couples can reach a resolution if there is kind of a strain there?
Yeah, sometimes, like, and Shannon, you probably have done this. You might need to seek a third party to help, right? It could be an accountant. It could be someone that you trust. It is hard, of course, to bring other people into your financial situation, but sometimes getting another point of view can be really, really helpful. But just like in any relationship where there's conflict, you want to understand the root cause. You want to go at it through healthy conversations where you're really trying to problem solve. You're like the ABCs of problem solving, analyzing, brainstorming, concluding. There's a lot of emotions attached to money. There's a lot of things that we have feelings on when it comes to spending habits. So trying to be as pragmatic as possible when you're addressing financial differences or unexplained expenditures, and not bringing emotion into it, because finances and money are already a fairly volatile emotionally. And so when we add more to it, it doesn't result in healthy conversations. So trying to be as pragmatic and structured as possible in these conversations, trying to make it a judgment-free zone, especially at the beginning of a relationship. So you can establish, how that relationship will continue going forward when you talk about financial matters.
Well, I think that's some great final advice. And I really want to thank you, Garth, for being here on Money Matters and sharing your insight with our viewers. If people want to connect with you or follow you, how can they do that?
Yeah, LinkedIn is the best way. Garth Sheriff. There's two of us, but there's only one that looks like me. So if you just Google that name and link me in, that's a great way to stay in contact with me.
Well, again, thank you so much for joining us. And I also want to thank our viewers for tuning in. Until next time, I'm Shannon Jackson.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
Your mouth can do a lot of amazing things.